By the end of this video, you'll have created basic movement for a cube. He can go left, right, up, down. He can bully his enemy around, jump for joy, and most importantly, have physics. In order to do that, we will create these objects, make them apply physics, add script to them, and then we see step by step how all this is possible. So, follow along. So, the first thing that we're going to have to do to get started is to add a new project to our game. Go to Unity Hub, add new. We click for a 3D project, we give it a very good name, and then you can just leave it in the default location and we click create. Then we get this window and we're going to set up our player, an enemy and a ground so we can use scripting. Go to the hierarchy, right click, 3D object and create a plane. Now the plane will be our ground and we will place our player and our enemy on it. So again, right click, 3D object, cube. The cube will resemble our player. So we can move it up a bit. Just click here to move it. And then you can see it is still floating. And you can place it on the ground. And we will do the same thing for our enemy. And let's create our enemy a capsule. There is our enemy, very mean looking, but we have an enemy. So, now Unity has an inbuilt physics system, so in order to use basic movement, we are going to use this physics system. They both have a box collider attached to it, so we can collide into each other, and we are also going to need a rigid body. So, we're going to click on our cube, add a component, and we're going to look for a rigid body. So now, our cube will use the physics system. But right now, this one doesn't. So let me show you. If I use the play button, everything should just look exactly the same. But when I use a rigid body, add component, rigid body, right now this is also using the physics system, so it should drop down on the ground. And we see that it actually worked. So, I got a little terrain set up, I got my player, my enemy, let's just put them down. They are both having box colliders, just by definition, because I created them, they have automatically a box collider. And they have rigid bodies, so I can use the physics system, which is what we want, because we want to let them use basic movement. So, for my player, I'm going to do basic movement, so I'm going to need a script for that. We are going to right click here, create. We're going to create a folder. I'm going to name it scripts, just to keep things organized. And inside the folder, we're going to create a new C# script. Let's call this player movement. Now, we can just drag this player movement onto our cube. Or, like I showed you before, add component, and there it is. So now this cube is using this C# script, and whenever I double click on it, it will open in Visual Studio and we can start programming, so we can give this one a little bit of movement. So now we are in our Visual Studio environment, and this looks very daunting, but don't worry, it's actually very simple to type in code in Unity. So what are all these methods? So, within these brackets, we are going to type our code for this script player movement. The start method just starts code whenever your game starts, and it runs it one time. Then our update method runs every frame. So whenever you want to check every time a player does something, like input, it has to check in the update function. Before we get started, we need a few variables. So you type in these three variables. We want to know the speed of our player. We can make him faster or slower by changing this one. And I'm going to set this to public. When I put this to public, I can also edit this one later here in the hierarchy and the inspector. Then these ones are private, they will be contained in our script. We need our horizontal input and our forward input. So we can go to left and right, or we can go forward and back. Now in Unity, we have something here. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, the Input Manager. Here you have all the inputs that you can have. And it made it very simple for us, so we can call upon these functions and execute them in our code. So, we have our horizontal input. It is named horizontal, so that's the one we want to get access to. Then, you have a negative and a positive one, because if we multiply with a minus value, we go to the left. With a normal value, we go to the right. You can also use A and D keys on your keyboard, because they're also popular when moving around. And same thing for vertical. The name of this axis is vertical, and it's down and up, or S and W. Now, when we come back to our script, we can start coding in the update method. So now I posted some code in my update function here. I added a comment. 2 slashes makes a comment, so this code won't get executed by the program. By the way, you can name these variables however you would like, but give them names that you are very convenient with, so they're easy to recognize. I also camel case used here, so I start with a small letter and then a capital one. And then the classes itself, they're all capital letters for each word. That's just a naming convention, get used to that one. So, here I get our horizontal input, so we can use this input as a float, because that's a decimal number, so we can get positive and negative values, like I showed you before. So to go to the left or the right, or up and down. So the input is input.getAxis. Remember here how we went here to the preferences, the project settings. We go to input.getAxis, because this is the axis and it's named horizontal. So, because that's the name here. Put it inside these parentheses and end your line with this remark. Then do the same thing for your forward input. So now we have declared our speed. We have our input. Now let's make him move. You're going to write this code. To move the player forward, we're going to transform the translate. When you go to the cube, there is a transform component. So let's see what it does. Oh, that's the skill. Just go to the position. We're going to change the position on the x-axis and on the z-axis. So that way you can see if these values change, my player moves. And that is what we're going to change now in our script. We're going to use the transform position component for that. So transform.translate. So we're going to alter this one. And this is a vector 3. And vector 3 forward means get position 0, 0, 1. So what does this mean? 0, 0, 1. So we're going to change the z position, which makes him go forward and back, or left and right in this case. So right now we're going to change this in the vector, because we have 3 points, the x, y and the z position. The forward one alters the z position, but it updates every frame. So to change that, we want to update over time. We're going to add this one, time.delta time. So if you have a fast or a slow computer, the time won't be affected by it because of this code. We're going to multiply this by our speed. We change it to 5.0f and the forward input. Because here I know if it is a negative or a positive value, so my player goes to left or right, or in this case up and down. So for my vertical input, it's exactly the same, but instead it is vector3.right, and it's going to change the x-axis. So remember, the camera is from this viewpoint, so left, right, and the z, up, down. So now we have declared our speed, our input, And when the player uses input, we're going to translate these vectors. We make sure it's added over time, times our speed, and it checks our input. Now we go to save, file, save. Or you can also, instead of saving here, Ctrl S to make it faster. Save was right here, but Ctrl S to make it faster. So I always use Ctrl S or Command S when you're on a Mac, so it's way faster. Then you can go to Unity, and let's test our game now. Go to the play mode. And right now, I can go left, right, up and down, or I can use A, S, D, W. And because of I use the rigid body, I can use the physics system, so I can bully this one around, push him off the edge, or push myself off the edge. Let's see what happens if I remove the rigid body from the cube here. Let's say I remove this, remove component. Now you will see I have input, but watch what happens. It doesn't fall down on the ground, but I can push still this one around. It's actually really fun, so maybe the best game ever, but he can fall down. So whenever I now remove the rigid body from my capsule, remove component, I still am able to mess around, but I mean I still have player input, but I go through the capsule, through the enemy. And I don't have it now. So in order to fix that again, we are going to add a component, the rigid body again, on both our objects here. Rigid body. And now when I play test, everything should work fine again. Actually, I called him our enemy, but I think we are the enemy right here. So get off. Okay, right now I also showed you, because this one here is a public float, I can see this one in the inspector. So I can change the value here, twice the speed. And you see it's way faster right now. But because I'm in play mode now, this won't change my game when I stop playing. So something to be aware of. If you like to add changes, add them here before you play here. But it's great to test some things out. Okay, so let's make our player jump now. In order to make our player jump, we have to get the rigid body of our player, because this one is adding the force in the physics system, so we're going to speak to that one. And then we are going to apply the force in the Y direction, because that's up. And that way we can make him jump. So we're going to back to our player movement script. Then we are going to make two more variables. The first one is a public float jump force. This will declare how high our player can jump. I make it public, so that way I can see it in the inspector. Also, we are going to need access to our rigid body to make him move up. So, declare the private rigid body, and I'm going to name it player RB. Then in our start method, we need to get access to this rigid body. So, in order to do that, we're going to add player RB equals get component, remember, from here. This is add component, but get component, get one of the components that we already have, and the rigid body. In these small brackets here is a rigid body. Close it off like this. And now we have access to the rigid body, so our player, now we can jump in the input, in the update section I mean. So now, let the player jump. How are we going to do this? We're going to add an if statement. If something happens, or when a condition is met, you're going to do something. So in this case, if the input get key down, key code space. So this means we're going to get the keys from our keyboard, and the key that we want is the spacebar. So if a player enters the spacebar, the code between these brackets is going to go executed. We're going to access our player RB. So we started with get component rigid body. It is stored in the player RB. And to that rigid body, we're going to add force, namely vector 3 up. And up means 0, 1, 0, which means it is the y-axis. And when we add force to the y-axis, our player goes up. We are going to go up in that axis towards our jump force. For now I set it to 5, but I'm going to make this a float. So I add an F to it. And then I'm going to apply the force immediately. Now, when you go like this, force mode, and then dot, you see the forces it is adding. And then you get an explanation, instant force. That is what we want in this case. Save your game, Ctrl S or click here. And when I go now back to Unity, add play, we can still mess around with this guy, but we can also, when I press the spacebar, go up. And you see here the speed and the jump force. Right now this is 10, which is a lot. So again 5, that's better. But what happens when I press spacebar multiple times? Hello Flappy Bird, or Flappy Cube in this case. We can jump as many times as we like. Now this is not what we want. So right now we are going to make sure that you can hit spacebar only when the player is on the ground. Now we are going to make sure, we are going to check if the player is on the ground. And then if it is on the ground, it can jump, otherwise it cannot. Because else we have made Flappy Cube. So what we're going to do is add a tag. Go here, select your plane, click tag. We're going to make a tag for that. Add a plus sign. We're going to name this one ground. Then go back to your plane here, add a tag, ground. So we can compare now if it is on the ground or not. And we're going to go back to our script. And I added some things in our script to make sure if we can check if it's on the ground. I made a public boolean is on ground to make sure he's on the ground. And I set it to true because the game he starts on the ground. Then we're going to make sure to add this code is on ground. These two signs here means that this condition has to be true and this condition has to be true in order to make him jump. You apply the force if he has input kick down space and he is on the ground, which we set to true, so it is true from the start of the game. Then he can jump, and while he is in the air, he's no longer on the ground, so we set this to false. We're going to save this, and then we're going to try play the game again. And now he can still move around, physics still work, and when I jump, I press the spacebar many times, he only jumps once. But there is no problem, namely, now you can see when I add the cube, he uses gravity, that's good, because he falls down. But when I go to is on ground, this one, now he can jump again, then it's off. So I cannot jump unless I click again on his ground. So the next challenge is to make sure that when he collides with the ground, then I can jump again, so this is put on automatically when he hits the ground. In order to fix this problem, we go back to our player movement script, and we're going to add a nifty little piece of code that's included in Unity. So, right now we stay in our class, but we go outside our update method, and we're going to make something on collision enter. And here it already is. And it auto-completes this for me. So whenever my object collides, I can do something, because these items here, they have colliders. And I'm going to use this code. I use another if statement. If my GameGob object here, which my player movement script is connected to, which is this cube, if it collides, so on collision enter, when it collides, I'm going to compare tag to ground. And remember, I set my plane tag to ground. Then is on ground is true. So it set it back to true, so that way I can use this one again. Remember to hit save, go back to Unity, and now when I go to my cube, I can see speed, jump force. I can change this one, or for easy measures I can just again change it here or here, but remember this one here. So let's test what we had before. Okay, great. Now when I jump, I cannot make a Flappy Bird clone again, but right now, when he hits the surface, he's back on the ground. And I can just mess around with these settings, like go nuts with it. Super fast, he can jump, he comes back, and I can jump like this. And now we have basic movement. So, we made these items, we had rigid bodies to them, we can use the axes to go back, forward, left, right, we can make him jump, we can make him jump again without being a Flappy Bird. I hope this tutorial was useful for you, so you can mess around with your own cubes and your own examples, and you can have basic movement in your game. Please like the video if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell symbol, that way you will get notified whenever I upload a new video. And remember to have a great day, see you next time.